Okay, so here's the heat exchanger. We just got it back, finished painting it, and all looks nice and clean. Ends are all good. And so now we're going to stuff this back in and hook the hoses up and bolt it back on and get it all set. So we got the back hoses all readied and the front hoses are in position. They're not on yet, but I got this one on, running through, and ready to stuff the heat exchanger in. Okay, so we got the heat exchanger back in, and this hose right down here is a little bit tricky, so you want to leave that off until you get it kind of positioned, and then put the hose on. And we haven't tightened the hose clamp down yet because we're going to use it to fit the other end. And we've got the studs on underneath, so right underneath here you can see, move the electronic thing out of the way. There's one bolt there, and the other bolt is right over there. So those two bolts are in place, and that holds this on. And got to hook this hose up right here. So this guy goes in here, and we should be all set with this part. So then we got to put this little solenoid back on. And okay, so we got to put this bracket on here. So move the hose out of the way. And this bracket goes back on to support the back right here. And I think we just dropped the nut. Okay, so what we got here is we got the port engine mount in with the bracket, and it's all back in. And this is what you need to do it. So we got a 15/16 deep socket right here, and this guy gets on the top bolt. And then we've got a 15/16 crow's foot, and let's see, we'll slide the crow's foot out so you can see how it comes out. So that's right there. That guy's got to be in there, right on the bolt up under here. And so first thing you do is you lock this little bolt down on the bottom. You get that set. And you can do that outside. And then these two bolts, the one underneath the bracket to the engine and on top, allow you to move the engine up and down just slightly. So that'll set the height. And the other thing is over here, you got to remember to put the long post back in on the top, and you've got this little bronze bracket for the raw water that goes up into the elbow. So this is raw water coming out of this and back up to the elbow for discharge off the boat. So that's the setup on the port aft engine mount on the Westerbeek. There you have it. Okay, this is the starboard aft engine mount, and the tricky part about this is you got to move the hoses while you're working on it. So these hoses can come out of the way. You got the raw water hose here coming up from the strainer, and you got the fuel hose return line that goes back into the tank selector valve. So you got to hold these out of the way and get the wrenches on down there. So do the same thing we did to the other side and tighten that up. Over here on the mounts, it's a little hard to see, but this is the lower bolt going under the engine, and it has the extension piece on it. And then right over here is the short bolt, and the short bolt goes in the engine there. And then you got your clamp for the hose, and the hose runs up this side of everything, and this will go into the heat exchanger. So heat exchanger hot raw water comes out down this hose and into the bottom of the JS transmission. So that's the setup we got, and there you have it. Okay, so here we are putting the hose clamps on the bottom of the transmission cooler hoses. And this is a little tricky to see, but you got to get the hose clamp on just right down there and the hose all the way up. And so I got the hose clamp tool on it, and we're going to tighten it up. And just check it to make sure the hose clamp's in the right position. It's hard to see down there. Okay, so I just put the heat exchanger back in a couple weeks ago, and this little video is showing the basic steps of doing it. And so what you do is you start in this compartment over here, and you can see the heat exchanger right up in there. And imagine this without any of the hoses on it. And you stuff the heat exchanger in right from where the propane tanks go. So heat exchanger comes right in here, and you get it generally in position right about there. And once it's in position, you then secure it. And to secure it, you got this bracket right here.
got to put that on. And then you got to put this bracket in the back right here back on. And there's a couple bolts on it down around the other side. I'll show them to you in a second. And get it in position and get it all ready to go back in. And then on this side over here, you can see the starter right there. So the first hose to put back in once you get it all in is this guy right here. And the key about this is make sure you put and it's right up in here. It's a little hard to see. I'm going to zoom in. I go out of focus for a second. Okay, right there. You got to get this hose clamp on. So you set the hose clamp on the tube first, and then you slip it in, and then make sure the hose clamp is facing out where you can get to it. Right in here. So that's the key. And then at the other end of this hose, and it snakes itself around underneath the alternator, goes on up here, right onto the water pump. So this is your coolant pump. Pumps the coolant through the system. You can put this hose clamp on right here. And then there's a bracket. Now some of the newer Westerbeeks actually have a metal elbow casting that fits right in here, and that eliminates this this bracket. And it's pretty close to the belt, so you got to be careful. Make sure that bracket's back in place. You can kind of see the gap right there for it. And then up top, you got to put this gasket back on right here to the exhaust manifold. So here's your exhaust manifold. Here's the first hose clamp here. It's easiest if this is facing up. Same thing over here. Put this one on. And this is a special tube from Westerbeek. It's got a little bend in it, just like the one on the side had a bend in it. So these are pre-molded, ready to go. And then here's the exhaust elbow right here. And you might have to adjust this piece so you can set the angle to the right angle. And this came without the fittings installed. The fittings came in the package with the exhaust elbow, but they weren't installed. And then here's the exhaust elbow hose clamp. It's a special hose clamp. Secures the exhaust manifold right up to the exhaust elbow. And there's a torque specification on this, so you don't want to over torque it. And then there's a little gasket that fits inside. So you gotta get the gasket in there. And they suggest using some high-tack sealant on one side. So I did that. It's a little sticky, makes a mess, but if you're real careful, you can do it. And I put it like this. Originally, I think it was more horizontal, but if it's up like this, then you can get the wrench on it, and you need a deep socket, so you need this extra room right up here to get the wrench on. So I just lined it up that way. It doesn't really matter which way it goes, as long as it's easy to get off later. And so every couple years or so, I think you want to open this up and replace the gasket in here, and then look down inside this and see if there's any scale and brush it out and clean the exhaust elbow. And then on the starboard side, you got to hook up the hose here. This is a hose for the raw water coming in. And I'll bring the camera over so you can see it from the pump. So there's the raw water hose coming up from the pump. And you can see it right here. And I put this little PVC piece on it. I'll show you that in another video. But it's a piece of PVC cut, because if you look right here, this throttle valve linkage abuts this hose, and that can cause a chafe point. So I cut a piece of PVC. There's actually a gap in it right here, so it's just spring loaded on the hose, and it provides just a little bit of wear point right there for it. So that should be pretty good. And so now let's go around the back. We'll look at the back of the engine. So that's really the front stuff on putting the heat exchanger back in, and we'll look at the back. Okay, so here we are. We're in the back, and here's the back of the engine. There's the heat exchanger, and let's back this up a little bit so you can get a better view. And I'm going to try to point some of these different bolts and things. So let's see. So we got a bolt down right way underneath here. We got to get this bolt on, and then this bolt back here. There's another one right down here. And this one isn't that accessible. This one is kind of blocked by this solenoid, so you got to take the solenoid off. So there's two bolts on the solenoid, one right here and one right here. But before you can get to this guy, you have to release this bolt. And when you do this, you really want to shut all the power off, pull the breakers out, make sure that this is all shut down, because there's live power to this electrical system here. So you got the main solenoid and you got the circuit breaker here, and this is a 10 amp circuit breaker right here, so you kind of got to loosen that up and rotate him so you can get a wrench back into here. So you lift this solenoid out of the way and then you can put these bolts back in place, and that's pretty quick. Down on this side, there is one hose clamp down here. You can get to it without taking any of the motor mounts out. It's pretty easy. And then you've got this one right here. So these are all pretty easy to put back in. And there's a hose clamp right up here, right at the top, right here. And that's pretty straightforward. And then the same thing on the other side. For this hose right here, the raw water output up to the exhaust elbow, this takes a couple times to get it cut right because you don't want a kink in here. So you want to make sure that this is all the right bend, and that can take a couple of times, taking a 1/4 inch off at a time to get that thing set. And again, set all the hose clamps so they're easy to be accessed. And the one that's a little tricky is way down the bottom down there, and that's easiest if you put this on last and get this hose in place, get this hose assembly in place, and then put this one on, and then put the exhaust elbow on. So that's the trick there. I guess you could save the hoses if you wanted to, but it's a heck of a lot easier if you just cut them off. The other thing going on here is right down here on this motor mount. This is the raw water hose from the seacock and strainer, and if you can see, there's a tie wrap on it right here, and then on the other side is a piece of garden hose cut and slit and slipped and tie wrapped right onto this hose, and that acts as a chafe guard because the top of that motor mount's right there, and this hose is can rub on it. The other place that there's a chafe guard that I put in here is right down here, and it's kind of duct taped in, but it's just a piece of hose slit, and that's to keep the raw water hose and the wires from getting cut on the fiberglass at this point. So that's an important piece to this puzzle. So there you have it. That's how you get the heat exchanger back in and get it all put back together. One more thing. There's two little spacers right here and right here on the back of this solenoid. And you can see there's two tie wraps hanging up here, and I'm just leaving them because I put the tie wraps around that little spacer, and you can then use the tie wrap to hold the spacer, and you can leave the tie wraps right here, so if you ever take it off again, the spacer is attached to the tie wraps and it's ready to come out. So that's just a real simple thing. And I haven't painted it yet, but I'm going to paint this everywhere it's all open. I got some paint. I'm going to put a big dam in here. I got a big sheet of plastic, and I'll open it up right in the middle, just like they do a root canal. So you cut a little hole in the piece of plastic, and you expose the one little section that you want to paint. You can give it a squirt of the paint, and then the excess goes all over the plastic and not all over everything else. So it takes a little bit of time, set it up, but that dam trick with the plastic allows you to, touch up the paint pretty easy in the engine. So there you have it. One Westerbeek heat exchanger reinstall project.